We'll commence what is effectively the last part of the business of the conference for today, and that is, in fact, it's a part of the conference I've been looking forward to very much. It's our opportunity to have our keynote speaker, Gregor, who I assure you is coming back to the panel, and some of our students who very kindly come down to agree to talk to us and engage with us and have a conversation with us. And I think it's worth saying up front that, and I think I mentioned it before, it's not very often that you get teachers, students and executive all in one room, all talking about learning and teaching, and you get this kind of unique opportunity to have this 3-4-way discourse. So what I'll do is I will introduce our student panellists to you. I'm going to ask them just to give us a minute or so of some of the reflections that they've gleaned from the conversations they've been in and the things that they've heard today. And then I'm going to throw the floor open to yourselves as their teachers and give you the opportunity to ask them some questions or have some conversations with them about some of the things and some of the experiences of being a student at ACU. So the first of our students here is Eamon Glass. Eamon is doing Bachelor of Nursing and Bachelor of Paramedicine. Eamon is the student senator and he's based on our Ballarat campus. Next to Eamon is John, and John Ryan Thomas is doing the Bachelor of Commerce, Bachelor of Law. John is the ACU National Student Association President, and he's on the North Sydney campus. And then next to John is Andrea Dos Santos, and Andrea is doing a Master's in Social Work. She's the PGA National President, and she is on the Brisbane campus. So as you can see, we have students with us who span a number of disciplines, also span undergraduate to postgraduate, and it's important to note are representatives of the student community themselves, elected representatives of that student community. So starting with you, Eamon, maybe you might like to tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe some of the things that have come to mind or that you've seen today. And of course, I should reintroduce Gregor at the end. Eamon.
Thank you, Kevin. Firstly, thank you all so much for having this student panel. It really is a privilege to be here amongst the academics and the executive, and to have you listening to students. It's normally us on the other side of this conversation listening to you lecture us. Hopefully I won't lecture you today. Some of the things that have sort of really resonated to me today is using educational technology to open up that dialogue between teacher and learner, learner to learner, and learner to content. But I think something that may have been missed is the dialogue between learner and teacher and receiving that feedback back to our teachers. I think it's really important that you take on board what it is we have to say, because we're sort of living what it is you guys are talking about today. And I'm really excited to sort of see what comes from this, because there's been some really impressive sort of conversations that have come out of this.
John.
So Eamon's managed to do the thank you already, but I will reiterate, it's amazing getting to sit up here and actually have questions asked of us. We're living these experiences, we're sitting in classrooms, we're doing tutorials, we're using Leo, we're using the library constantly, especially as a law student, and it's great that you guys are willing to ask us questions to hopefully further the amazing service that ACU offers us. The one thing I've really learnt today and been able to hear today is the amount of planning that goes into the back end of some of the things we do. Listening to how unit outlines and subjects get created and the amount of thought and effort that goes into it, and then trying on top of that, on top of something that's been well established, trying to integrate technology and new developments into that process. And also one of the other ones which I've actually experienced in my own subjects is the use of technology, cameras, filming, that sort of stuff, which was interesting to see how it was planned and how it's been researched at the faculty level before it's been ever given to me to use in a classroom. So it's been very interesting.
Thank you. Yes, I would also like to thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. I guess for me, what the reflection and the action will be how often we fail to design for interaction. And interesting, because in preparation for this day, I spoke with Kevin a few times, and I had the opportunity to actually ask my fellow postgraduate colleagues about what their views were about how ACU engages with technology and how we are providing technology to enhance learning, and the feedback was very positive. So my postgraduate colleagues have really good views about the way ACU is engaging with technology. However, the fact that we often fail to design for interaction, according to Gregor, is something that will really stay with me. And he mentioned about changing the nature of the debate. And for me, the question was, to do that, should we actually start reflecting about our culture and change the focus towards how can we perhaps move away a little bit from technology and look at different ways of engaging, redefining the way that we interact. I think technology has not answered all the questions, and are we moving away from people by the way we often rely on technology? So I think for me that's what will be kind of resonating in my mind for the next few weeks. But again, I think these are really important points for all of us to think and engage in the future.
Thank you, Andrea. And Gregor, I don't know if you wanted to make any points or add any comments on the basis of what we've heard. So, colleagues, questions for our student panellists. And I would ask, I mean, I know you, Nazir, but if colleagues could just say who they are and which faculty they're from, just for the benefit of our students, that would be good. Thank you.
Nasir Batros, Peter Faber Business School. The question is to both Ayman and John. You are both doing double degrees. I would like you could share with us your reflection of the learning and teaching styles of two different disciplines, and what's your reaction as a receiver compared to those students who are doing single degrees.
Thanks, Nazir. I suppose I'm quite fortunate studying nursing and paramedicine. Both those degrees complement each other really well. So the delivery of the teaching is quite similar across the board. I haven't found there's been a lot of difference. If anything, it's enhanced my learning from nursing to paramedicine. I've found a lot of the times the course has been structured in such a way that what I'm learning in nursing is reflected in what I'm learning in paramedicine. So in paramedicine, for example, I'll learn sort of the acute setting of an illness, and then that's carried through to nursing and the longevity of that care and sort of caring for them across the lifespan. So from a nursing and paramedicine point of view, I found it's been really fantastic, and it's made me a better practitioner. None of my straight nursing colleagues are in the room, so I can say it. I feel like I'm better equipped to go into the nursing field because of the paramedicine degree I have with me.
I think I've had quite a different experience being commerce law, where law is a very nuanced degree. There's very set units, set focuses. In my commerce degree, I've got a marketing major. And marketing, I think, in some ways by its nature, is very at the forefront. We were looking at a lot of social media, online technologies, that sort of areas, whereas law is still very much paper-based. We still read journals, even if they are online. We still go back to cases. And so they're two very different degrees, and they only have a limited crossover in units like marketing law or commercial law, which coincidentally marketing law is actually a marketing unit, commercial law is a law unit, and they're really the only crossovers where there's some level of similar teaching.
I might actually extend your question out a little bit to Andrea, because you've got the undergraduate, postgraduate context as well, and I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say similarly between those two spaces.
Yeah, I completed my Bachelor of Social Sciences actually at ACU, and came back 6 years later to do my Master's. Actually, may I ask you to repeat the question, just so I make sure I address it correctly?
I was simply asking your experience, reflecting on you, in this case, and your learning experience as an undergraduate student, and compare that with a postgraduate experience in terms of the learning and teaching styles used by yourself and used by the teachers. And also, if you like, to elaborate on the role of the technology in both level of learning.
Right. So looking back at my undergraduate experience, that was actually extremely enjoyable. I was very much focused on getting the marks and studying very hard for it, and I felt that I was extremely supported by a number of staff members, lecturers, librarians. That makes our life a lot easier. As a postgraduate student, I came back to continue to find to be very supportive in that in my studies. Although this time I decided to really make the most of the university life, not only looking at what's really on the curriculum. So being the president of the Postgraduate Student Association, as well as the Macaulay United Club, which is a club designed to allow and facilitate the integration of international students in Brisbane into the Australian and the university way of life, has really been part of my experience so far. In all of that, I think that technology has been a great tool to have at ACU. When I did my bachelor, Blackboard was really strong and it was doing really well, and it was fantastic to come back and find a platform that's even more robust and solid, and again providing us with all that's required to exceed in our learning. So I feel very proud to be at ACU and to actually be in this institution and to be able to carry that name forward as a practitioner very soon.
Gregor, just again, slightly extending the question, but in terms of your experiences of students at Melbourne, how do you think they might respond to a question along those lines?
So in terms of the 2 degrees,
The double degree.
we don't have them anymore.
The use of technologies and.
So I mean, I think that the double degree is an interesting question because the classic law arts or law com or sort of professional disciplines training with undergraduate training, we changed the model quite profoundly in 2007, so that we have these generalist undergraduate degrees that lead to postgraduate professional qualifications. So in a way, part of the conversation at our institution is about what is lost when you move to those kind of models. So it's a little bit different for us, I suppose.
Thank you. And Michael, and then a colleague at the back.
Michael Theophilus from the Faculty of Theology and Philosophy. This question's really related or directed initially to Eamon and Gregor, but happy to hear from everybody. Eamon, a specific question I want to ask you, since you raised it in your opening comments. What, in your opinion, do you think is the most effective form of feedback, closing that loop between learner and student and teacher? Obviously, there's official mechanisms that we have, like anonymous student feedback and the like, but it can take many forms. So both effective and satisfying, in particular, for a student that wants to close the loop fully to enhance their perspective. And I guess the edge that I hope, Gregor, you could mention is what ways could we integrate technology to serve those purposes?
Eamon, I might give you first crack at this one.
Thank you. I suppose I'm quite spoilt being from the Ballarat campus. We are but a blip on ACU's radar. So
I said they could be controversial.
Very good blip. But we're spoiled in the regard that we have fantastic lecturers down the back there. And they have this open door policy, and so I find the best way of giving feedback to them is just that face-to-face interaction and the conversations you have with them, and the dialogue that ensues. I find you get that immediate feedback, as well as they sort of get your thoughts and feelings behind what you're saying, rather than in an anonymous email Sometimes the SELT surveys, I mean, I'm sure you guys can all relate, can sort of be based on the marks the student anticipates they're going to get. I know certainly when I haven't got a mark that I like back, I'm already drafting the horrible things I'm going to say about my lecturers in the SELT surveys. I don't do it in the end. But in terms of the best way to provide that feedback, I promise I don't. I think the best way to do it is that face-to-face interaction. Yeah.
Just checking, did he say that out loud? Yeah, he did, didn't he? Gregor, thank you.
So I think that's a really good question, and I suppose picking up what Eamon was saying, I think I just read an article just before I got on the plane, as you do, that was looking at the preferences that students have for different types of technologies. It's not quite the right word, but it was looking at physical and virtual resources or infrastructure and the ways in which curriculum was designed. And a study out of the UK that was asking students if they were going to put their money where their mouth was, what would they rate as most highly? What was the lowest priority for students was space, was physical spaces, which I think is interesting. And the tenor of the article, I don't want to misrepresent it because I haven't read it fully. Tenor of the article is we're pumping millions of dollars in a arms race around beautiful, wonderful learning spaces on campuses that students are not really seeing as the mandatory things. So that was the lowest. Things like digital technologies and different content in the curriculum, different expertise of staff, as in that they felt that the background of the staff was wrong, was sort of middle ground. But the thing that was far and away the most valued thing by students was face time with an expert who's a discipline expert in their undergraduate or graduate experiences. And so I think that talks completely resonates with what you were saying, and also seems to be supported by that article. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing that I'd say, which is the second part of your question, which is about the use of technology. So I think that there's a couple of things that we can start to think about there. Things like grade, mark, and Turnitin is a tool that is underutilised in my... Turnitin is a plagiarism detection tool or academic integrity tool. There's a part of it which is grade mark, which is about digital marking, which I think can be used quite effectively and elegantly and efficiently by staff that I think students appreciate. We've got some faculties in our institution who are doing it really well to great success. The Graduate School of Education is doing this, and other faculties not so. So I think that that's one. The second thing that I'd say is we ran a study that the Flickr study that I showed before was about social media and the use of social media. One of the great uses, everybody thought that social media was going to be about collaboration in undergraduate or graduate classes. Turns out that it's not, unless it's really designed well, not particularly useful for that. Well, that's what we found. I don't want that to go on record. But the thing that we did find was incredibly useful and consistent across all 9 implementations was the way in which students valued it for informal, formative feedback on what they were doing. So the ability, if you've got a class of 900 psych students and they're into 30 groups of 30, the ability to see what another group is doing on the topic that you're struggling with is incredibly useful for them, because they go, oh my God, look, I'm not struggling as much as that group over there. But also it's just reassuring to students in that informal formative feedback. The point of that story is that we can rely more on students to provide students with feedback. And that feeds into the last thing that I'll say, and I know I'm hogging the mic, which is learning analytics and dashboards provide another mechanism for this. Not sort of trite engagement metrics, and we've got to be really careful about how we design that. But I think that the students, and Linda Corrin and Paula DeBarber, 2 of my colleagues, are doing great work in this area from Melbourne, and they're really investigating what students find useful in calibrating how they're going in courses in terms of study strategies and resources they're using compared to their peers. Now, that's not always perfect, but it is another mechanism that technology can be used to provide feedback to students.
Thank you, Greg. Or John, you wanted to comment as well.
One comment I'll make, which is a little self-serving as a head of a student association. A lot of feedback comes through us, so while it's not a technological means, and I've certainly seen it through I've been within the law school since it started in North Sydney. And during that time, there's very specific students who have stood out as student leaders, representatives, whichever way you want to put it, who are the ones who are normally willing to go to the faculty and have the discussions about what the issues are and to convey the issues, suggestions from the other students. And a lot of those students who do have a problem, a concern, whatever it may be, often aren't willing to address it with the teacher. There's the power discrepancy between the two positions sometimes scares the student. So they'll go to someone they trust, another student, who can then convey that that piece of information. It's, I guess, the faculty's issue is going to be finding that student who other students trust and are happy for them to convey that information.
I just wanted to, I'm a big fan of surveys. Not sure if a lot of students are, but I am. We recently just completed our postgraduate national survey that looks specifically at postgraduate student data, which I'm not sure if it's widely available to everyone yet. I also, I like focus groups. I know they take time, they cost money, but I think it's a very effective way of listening and gathering feedback. You'll be surprised at how many students are willing to talk about issues and what we do well. There's a lot of things we do well that we don't often encourage, that we don't often talk about, and I think that's something we must improve on. Definitely, just like John said before, the open door policy is what I think makes ACU quite distinct from other universities. There is a great opportunity, at least in the School of Social Work, to just knock in the door and have your voices heard. So if we can always try to maintain the essence and never lose the face-to-face that keeps us together, it's something that I would strongly like to say, I guess.
Thank you, Andrea. And we had another question from a colleague down the back.
Rhett Quinney from School of Nursing in Ballarat, and this is a fairly specific question, but nursing's been doing IBL and problem-based learning for a considerable length of time, and I realise that the School of Law is fairly embryonic in that, but one of the areas of feedback we get consistently from students is that IBL is difficult for them, and some of the load that we place on students in regard to preparation for IBL can be particularly difficult as well. So I'm looking for some feedback and some ideas of your experience of IBL and problem-based learning, and whether it's been a positive experience and whether or not it has challenges for you.
Let me tell you that microphone's like a hot chalice up here being passed around to who's going to respond to that. It's land when the music stopped, Eamon had it.
Yes. IBL. Right. No, IBL, the trouble I find with IBL is a lot of the time I find it lacks direction. I get my trigger for the week, and that's sort of supposed to stimulate my learning, I suppose. But a lot of the time it's just seen as a hurdle task where you do your trigger, you write your couple of hundred words about that and you submit it and that's it. There's not a lot of collaboration between your peers and what they're doing with their different triggers, so there's not that that learning across the board with the people in your class. So I find that's the biggest issue. It can become quite segmented and you just focus on your one trigger for the week, but that presents only a very small fraction of what we're actually meant to be learning. And to my teachers and my lecturers' credit, there's an attempt in the tutorials to sort of consolidate that learning, but I just don't know that the IB model, personally, I don't know that the IBL model allows for that fully.
Any other takers? No? Good question. Stumped the panel. Was it? Oh,
yes. Hi. My name's Tanya. I'm from the School of Science in Melbourne. I'm just wondering if all of you could possibly comment on, you are all clearly driven and committed students. I'm wondering, clearly you are.
Gregor
Just wondering
was
if
once.
you could give us some advice from the other end of the spectrum. What would you say to students? What do you say to students that come to you, or do you know of students that are struggling? And what do you say to them in terms of how to improve and to stay on task?
Well, it's the first time I've ever been called driven, and so that's very nice. Thank you. I appreciate that. I suppose I haven't had students come in, but what I would say to them is seek out the support networks that are around you. It's something ACU does extraordinarily well, and I know this speaking to my friends that go to other institutions, is the pastoral care that's offered at ACU is exceptional. If you are struggling, there is a host of services available to you, whether that be with academic skills, with your lecturers, and even with your peers. Everyone at ACU is very, very willing to assist you, and they want you to do well. It's good for business to see us do well. So everyone is there to offer your support. So I guess my advice would be to seek it out, and you will very quickly find that support.
It's an almost daily stream of people through most student association doors who come in with a failed assessment, issues with a lecturer because they didn't understand something and they went up and asked and didn't get the answer they wanted. Literally, we see almost dozens of people on a daily basis. And we are really fortunate, as Eamon said, that there are these services with academic skills, counselling, etc. I think one of the problems I personally see that I think the uni tries its best to address is the students aren't already aware of these services, even though it's put in front of their face on an almost daily basis. I can't tell you how many academic skills posters I see, counselling posters, the results, the student advocacy workshops that are going on at the moment around results. They're everywhere, they're emailed out, but students don't notice them, and aside from us giving them the information, I don't know how else we can provide it to them, but they are services that do really help the students.
I think it would be quite similar. I do have a fair amount of postgraduate students that contact me and they are struggling on a number of areas. My advice is always to really seek those support systems that are available. The counselling unit, the academic skills unit do a terrific job, and I do always recommend those. I think in line with what Gregor said before, I'm a big fan of space for postgraduate students. Some of you may have heard about some of our claims to really be able to get together and discuss what our concerns are, what are our strengths, and how we can build that identity of being a postgraduate student in a university largely dominated by undergraduate students. So I think to have that opportunity to really gather can really also enhance and strengthen and assist those who may be struggling and may not even notice where they are not doing well. So I think number one, definitely the support services, because they do a terrific job. And number two, to really be able to provide spaces where students can come together, not just to study, but to have a coffee. Most of the postgraduate students that I talk to, they often complain about how isolating their experiences are, and that can lead to difficulties. So I would say to bring them together as much as you can, so we don't let things go far, and we can actually tap into the issues before they go out of hand.
I think that was to all the panellists as well, Gregor.
Well, I don't really have anything to add. I think that what you guys are saying is spot on in terms of networks and support and pastoral care, and the perennial issue of services being offered by institutions that go unrecognised. I think that's a really tricky nut to crack. I still haven't seen the way in which you resolve that, because people want services just in time, just when they need them, but the broadcast marketing of services doesn't hit that just in time, just required need. So the only thing that I would say, aside from those kind of things, and it does depend on the degree of difficulty that the individual is in, so I'm going to take the question much more in terms of study rather than something happening in your life that is making you struggle. And the advice that I would give people is two things. and I've got my son in my mind. He had his parent-teacher interview. He's 9 years old, so I'm not a helicopter parent, but he had his parent-teacher interview, and he's very, very energetic, but he sometimes misses the point of the exercise, is what the teacher said. He goes in and then he hands in his work, and the teacher says, "That's fantastic, Finbar, but we're not doing something on that topic today. It's something..." And so one of the things is step back and take the heat out of the situation and just reflect on what you're meant to be doing and what floats your boat and what you're interested in. That's the first bit of advice. And the second bit of advice is sort of the antithesis of that, which is keep at it. There's something about a consistency of momentum, which I think is often an important thing for students to recognise, that if you just keep chipping away at things, it often makes the whole enterprise a lot easier.
Thank you. Karen.
Sorry, Karen Noble from Faculty of Education and Arts. I'd just like to take us back to the facilitating learning through integration of technology kind of topic, and ask about the notions of building connectedness and relationships that can be mediated. So picking up on what you're talking about around the importance of the relationship and the connectedness, but how we can better use technology to connect our cohorts across campuses, given that we are a national university with a national identity, rather than our students necessarily seeing themselves as a campus-based cohort, to see themselves as a national cohort, and how we as teaching staff across those different locations can use technology to mediate that relationship as well.
The first one, like, really?
Here's that hot mic again.
I don't know. I don't think I'm the best person to answer that, because I'm not the technology person. I haven't downloaded the app, for example. I'm sorry.
Forgiven.
You know, I'm all for the face-to-face contact, and I know it's difficult with being a national university, and I do have ongoing discussions with people from Brisbane and people from Strathfield, who often look at different ways of engaging, and we have looked at opportunities to do a lot more video conferencing, a lot more workshops that we don't need to necessarily rely on being there in person. But I guess it's hard to take my social work hat away and really just dismiss the opportunity to really be together. Sometimes for me, it's extremely important to look at the person in the eye, to be able to just have that extra level of connection. For me, that's irreplaceable. I don't think technology can ever take that away from us, and it shouldn't. So I don't think I'm perhaps the most qualified person to really answer that to start with.
So I've, of course, got a bit of a perspective on this. So I didn't download the app either. So I think that there's a couple of ways to approach that question. So one is that there's a role that technology plays, particularly in the first two quadrants, and just simply in terms of access. So that there are things that you can, if you've got a distributed system, higher education system in different campuses, there are ways in which technology can just simply reduce the access barriers to different people, resources, and that's an advantage. But I don't think that that's the heart of your question. So if you move it beyond there, I'll give you two examples. One of the examples was in the Beadle Gallery today, which is the ways in which you can think, and it's not about the technology comes second. Whatever the tool you use is up to you. But there's something about the Beadle Gallery example that genuinely people from distributed locations were able to make the learning activity better, enhanced, through the fact that they were distributed. It wasn't a homogenous group. And there was something about that that makes it really neat, clever, enhanced. And it is that thing that I said at the start of the talk today, where something about that you harness technology to give you something extra, and that's what you've always got to look for. And I think the Beadle Gallery does that. I'll give you one other example. Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Right. I'm going to talk in code because it's a grant that I reviewed yesterday, which is a really good grant. There may be a campus of the University of Melbourne that is in an agricultural area one of the difficulties with that is that the Parkville campus in the centre of Melbourne is dislocated from people who go up on placement to the Dookie campus, which is north of Melbourne. But we want, of course, students to have an experience that is in the country, you know, if they're doing veterinary and agricultural science, on placement for a semester in there. But we want curriculum to be shared across those two locations. That's a tricky scenario. So what this application did yesterday was make an argument for the resources, and by that I mean the knowledge base that exists in Dookie, which is data about the farm and a whole range of metrics that are used about cows and different ways in which there are things that are accessible on a daily basis in Dookie but are not accessible in Parkville. And similarly, there are things in Parkville that are not accessible in Dookie. So the learning design that they were suggesting was take data out of Dookie and on a regular basis through an inquiry-based approach have that data streamed back to Parkville, and the people in Parkville do some analysis on it that the people in Dookie need. So that's the rationale for bringing those two groups together. Doesn't matter what the technology is, but it's a really neat way in which you can get an advantage out of joining those dislocated groups together. And so that's about artefacts, it's about data, but it might be students, it might be different perspectives of students living in different locations, rural, regional, metropolitan, remote, whatever it is. And I think if we think about the advantages that can be brought by the composite of those campuses, I think we're onto a winner. Does that make sense?
John?
I've lived through a number of units that have been run on both the North Sydney and the Melbourne campus in law and in marketing. And especially in law, there's a bit of a disconnect because there's different legal backgrounds between the two states. So there's some things that work and some things that don't. One of the things I do think works, and I hope I don't get in trouble in saying some things, is communication on Leo isn't easy, intuitive, or sometimes something students are gravitated towards, but when it does happen, it works really well. So I really remember with an assignment in one of my law units, someone posting a question, and it was almost an administrative question, but it stopped 30 emails to our lecturer because they were able to jump on it, answer it, and everyone pretty much saw the response or mentioned it to someone else who had seen the response, because the students all talk, at least a number of them had seen the comment and had then relayed that to other people. In some of my marketing units, which I vividly remember from a couple of years ago, we had to design a business, and it happened over a number of weeks. And there were things that were posted in a group forum sort of situation, and it was amazing because we got to see ideas that were coming out of other states that were completely different to what we were thinking, because they had a completely different demographic, social environment, cultural environment, things that were happening in Melbourne especially, because it's a bit more of a cultural hub in many ways than Sydney, that we could then use in... Melbourne will always take that, but we'll beat them at sport. But that was a great way that we then in Sydney were able to go, oh, that's an awesome idea. We'll take bits of that and incorporate it into our own. And that wouldn't have happened if we weren't a national university with that ability and with the ability to see some of these responses and make judgments on them. So, yeah.
Thank you, John. We've got two more questions, and the first of those is over here. Just behind you.
Sorry. Hi, my name's Jennifer Crosby. I'm a liaison librarian. My question is for all of the students. You might meet a librarian at a really horrible time in your life where you encounter like an academic database. And sometimes I feel like a student's ability to use a technology might impede upon their learning, like their ability to grasp the concepts of like a search strategy or why they need to use academic sources, etc., is kind of difficult to understand when they're confronted with a technology that they've not seen before. So in your experience, have you ever encountered instances where your familiarity with the technology or your ability to use a technology impedes upon your learning? And who do you go to for help with that? And how do you think we could better improve the help that we give you with learning technologies?
When I started my law degree, as opposed to when I'd started my commerce degree and transferred into law, with law, within our first few weeks, we actually had the law librarian at the time come and show us how to use the databases. So we were intimately aware of how to search cases, how to find journal articles, how to go from one to the other, what the different tools were to do that. And that made a huge difference, especially in law, to be able to find that information. To the best of my recollection, I don't think I ever got that in commerce in any unit. And my ability to find academic journals in that space was self-taught, most likely. And I think it would have been something that would have benefited me greatly to have a better way to find those sources.
I probably should specify that while I gave the library as an example, I think we all be used to hear as well any other examples you might have, using an online quiz, using Leo, things like that too. Sorry.
So just for those colleagues who may not have heard, the question was asked in the context of the library, but the response sought is more broadly around the range of other tools and resources. Eamon.
When I first started, we were sort of really well orientated to the systems that were used at ACU, Leo, the academic journal databases that we have. However, as I sort of progressed through my degree, I began to realise that it's sort of the orientation we had only scratched at a surface level of what the capability of these resources were. So what I suppose I would like to see is in years 2 and 3, at the start of each of those years, we have more orientation sessions that sort of go further in depth to the capabilities of these resources, so we can use those better. And that's obviously going to enhance our learning. And I think that could be done across the board with Leo, the quizzes. So I'd like to see some more of that.
I'm going to contradict Eamon here. From a law perspective, I know most of my colleagues in the units I do would hate being retaught, even if it went further in depth, at the beginning of each year. But I would say that if it was around the time of an assessment, so when we were introduced to an assessment task, all of a sudden we're thinking, I need to find out this information. I'll probably need some articles. I'll probably need some cases. I think personally, that's when I think that we would be most interested and engaged in learning new abilities and how to delve deeper.
Yeah, look, I particularly think that in my experience, I have always been well served with the services available, whether being through quizzes, tutorials, and the librarians have always been extremely helpful in all of that. So I think for me, I particularly have benefited from having tutorials, sort of mini workshops at the very beginning of my degree, which kind of taught me very clearly what the softwares, what the systems were, and allowed me to know who to ask to if I needed more. We do have in social work a librarian dedicated to our area, and she has been doing a great job in that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I really think that if we could improve at something, I would appreciate to have librarians in after-hour services a little bit more available. That would be particularly good for me. I am a night learner, so sometimes when I stay in the library until 11, which could be a bit later, by the way, it's always very helpful to be able to talk to someone, to be able to still have books loaned and all that. So that's my only really, I guess, point of improvement. Apart from that, I feel that as a student, both from the bachelor and from the master's, I've always been well served.
Thank you. And we have one final question, I'm afraid. We have run out of time, although I should say our students will be hopefully able to stay and join us for a while afterwards, and I'm sure will be very happy to answer more questions.
Thank you, Kevin. To Ling from Peter Faber Business School. I just would like to have some specific question. If you have any negative experiences using technology, or when technology is used in your learning, where it may inhibit rather than enhance your learning. And by technology, I mean Leo, I mean any technology that you may have encountered, like social media. And also to identify what technology has been most helpful in your learning. And I would like to particularly ask too that if you know, if you have your own experience, or if you know of someone first year having difficulties with online learning. Thank you.
I suppose my biggest bugbear of technology that we use at ACU is with the e-portfolios. It is a clunky system. It is a frustrating system. It boggles my mind why we still use it. But it's not bad.
You can well look at me.
I got my results yesterday, so I don't care. What I would love to see is a move away from the e-portfolios, or perhaps if we insist on continuing to use them, is to perhaps look at a different system that is a bit more user-friendly and sort of allows for slightly better control over who sees your content. I'm in my 4th year now, and I'm still really not sure how to make some of the content on there private and whatnot. In terms of the positives, there are many positives from the technology we use at ACU. I think Leo is one of the greatest systems I've come across in terms of my learning. The online lecture resources are enormously helpful, as well as most of the CAL material that's provided to us. I think that's definitely enhanced my learning, particularly when I go back and study. I don't necessarily do the CAL in a chronological order in week 1 to week 2. I'll get to my sort of study period during SWAT-VAC, and I'll go back through the CAL and use those resources then. There's more positive and negative, I suppose.
I think mine both link into the same, which is Leo. I think Leo's an amazing resource, but I also think there's some portions of Leo that are underutilised, understood, and I think that lets down some of our learning. I know I've personally seen both sides of that. I've seen Leo used really well, and I've seen it used very poorly. I'm not sure if there's any of the law lecturers left in the building, but we don't have any online lectures. It's all attendance, and sometimes there is just a lack of use provided, which is sometimes annoying, but that's something that we work with. In terms of first years having trouble with online units and stuff and online content, I've certainly seen it a lot this year in my role as president with students coming in who have no understanding of how to use something. Normally, like Leo, it's not normally something that they can go to the library for help with, and they don't know who to go to help with those areas, and they don't feel it's appropriate. It sounds horrible when I say this about students, but it doesn't feel appropriate in week 12 to learn how to use Leo. Obviously, they should have learnt how to use it quite a bit before week 12, but that tends to be when they start to panic and attempt to learn something and have no idea where to learn it from.
Yeah, for me, again, the portfolio, bit of a nightmare. I actually felt that was creating another Facebook profile when I created my portfolio. I don't really see the point, and I don't think I actually made the most of it, perhaps because I didn't understand what that was all about, and that actually reminds me I need to do it again, second semester. Anyway, no. I'll do it, I promise, on time. So for me, that was one of the things that was extremely frustrating, was to actually create this portfolio. And for me, it felt like another Facebook page. And I don't even have Facebook on my mobile phone, so I found that was a bit unnecessary. Leo, yes, it is something that I found extremely useful. It's user-friendly. I don't ever recall having it crashing and not being available when you need it the most. So I do find that some lecturers do find it difficult, though. From a student perspective, I found it useful, but I have had a lot of my lecturers complaining extensively about how unfriendly, how difficult, how time-consuming it can be to use it, and that somehow is translated to students by the lack of using the tool, and then it creates double work. Sometimes we are submitting things on Turnitin, and then we receive the result back on email, so it doesn't make sense. The consistency of the use of the tool, it can be quite confusing sometimes, although I actually found that to be a quite useful platform. In terms of positives, there are a number that I can recall. One particularly was how Academic Skills Unit had tutorials to teach us the basics about referencing, about writing styles. So for someone that's not very technological, that was extremely useful to kind of have that and have had the time to look at it, because please don't create new things and don't give us the time to actually explore. That creates more on top of what we already have. So I found that because we had this 10 minutes session within the class to look into what Academic Skills Unit was doing, that a lot of us actually enjoyed it, that a new way of learning and being refreshed on some of the ways that we can continue to learn. So yeah, I think there are really great things that are being delivered through technology. That example of the academic skills is one of them. And yeah, I think we are on track with it.
Okay, e-portfolios, I heard you.
Thank you.
I don't think you would be alone in this room with your academic colleagues, who many of whom are equally challenged with the e-portfolio tool, and we are working on that. Let's just say it's a work in progress.
Can do a group hug in the end about it.
It's a journey. Hopefully one day it will turn out to be a destination. We are actually a little bit over time, and I know that there are other questions, but we just don't have the time to take them, I'm afraid. I'm very conscious that people have to be somewhere. We are shortly going to hear from the DVC once more, but before we do that, I do have a small gift for you, a token of our thanks for you giving up your time to come here. I'll give it to you afterwards, if that's okay. Please join me in thanking our student panel. Andrea Dos Santos, Eamon Glass and John Ryan Thomas. Thank you, guys.